Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really broad mix. We've got sources piled high, covering everything from, frankly, catastrophic climate news
Yeah, some heady stuff there.
to the specifics of arms trails in Sudan and even, tips on the best way to take your daily walk for heart health. It's quite the range.
It really is. And what we're trying to do here is pull out the core insights from all this. Think of it as a global snapshot showing these really high-stakes, interconnected risks. It's not just politics. It's deeper structural issues in how things are governed or maybe aren't governed.
Exactly. We want you to quickly get a handle on the big, immediate challenges, but also see the patterns emerging.
So let's dig in. We'll start with two major global crises that really set the stage: climate and conflict.
Okay, first up, this environmental assessment. Well, let's start. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres basically said humanity has failed. We haven't limited global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, that target's gone.
Mm.
He stated pretty clearly that an overshoot is now inevitable.
Inevitable.
Yeah.
That's a strong word from the UN chief.
It is. But what's interesting, or maybe alarming, is the immediate shift in strategy. He's not saying give up. The new focus is damage control, essentially, making sure that overshoot, since it is happening, is as short as possible and as low in intensity as possible.
Right, because it's the length and the intensity of that overshoot that determines if we hit those really scary tipping points, isn't it?
Precisely. We're talking about changes that, we can't just reverse, like the Amazon potentially flipping from rainforest to savanna.
Which would be catastrophic.
Absolutely. And add to that the risks for Greenland's ice sheet, West Antarctica, our coral reefs. The intensity level is literally about what kind of planet we leave behind.
And the reason we're facing this inevitability, it seems, comes down to this huge gap between what's needed and what's promised. Science says 60% emissions cuts needed, right?
That's the figure for staying near 1.5 C, yeah.
But the actual commitments from countries, the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, they add up to what?
Only about a 10% reduction.
10% versus 60. That's not a gap, that's a chasm. It really highlights a massive systemic breakdown.
It does. And that's why Guterres is pushing so hard for a shift before the COP30 climate conference in Belém. He's arguing quite forcefully that power needs to move away from corporate lobbyists.
And towards who?
Towards civil society. And he specifically highlighted indigenous communities, calling them the best guardians of nature.
And Brazil, hosting COP30, seems to be putting money behind that idea. There's this big fund.
Yeah, the Tropical Forests Forever facility, it's about $125 billion. And the key part, as you hinted, is that a fifth of that money is earmarked to go directly to indigenous communities.
So that's not just talk. It's actually shifting resources, potentially shifting power on the ground.
Exactly. It's an acknowledgement, perhaps, that the old way, the state-led diplomacy, hasn't delivered on its own. A recognition of failure, almost.
Okay, speaking of failures and accountability, let's pivot. From the climate crisis to a specific devastating conflict, Sudan. Over 150,000 dead, 12 million displaced. It's a humanitarian disaster.
It truly is. And digging into some of the documentation, particularly reports seen by the UN Security Council, reveals some disturbing details about the weapons being used.
Like what specifically?
Well, British military equipment showing up in the hands of the RSF militia, the group accused of genocide.
British equipment. What kind?
It includes things like UK-made small arms target systems. These apparently come from a company in Wales and fall under the ML-14 military category, specific training and simulation gear.
ML-14. Okay, so that's not just bullets and guns. It's more specialized tech.
Right, and it's not just accessories either. The reports also documented British-made Cummins engines.
Cummins engines for what?
They were found in UAE-manufactured Nimr Ajab armored personnel carriers, APCs, recovered from the RSF.
Okay, so British engines in UAE vehicles used by the RSF in Sudan. That really raises questions about UK export controls to the UAE, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially since the UAE has been accused of supplying the RSF.
It certainly does, and what's particularly concerning is the timing. Even after the UN Security Council got reports detailing this equipment's presence in Sudan, these dossiers were dated June 2024 and March 2025.
Yeah.
The UK government apparently issued what's called an open individual export license to the UAE for the exact same type of ML14 equipment.
An open license. What does that mean in practice?
It basically means the exporter can ship unlimited quantities of that specific equipment type without needing new permission for each shipment. It shifts the burden of tracking where it ends up. It makes proper monitoring incredibly difficult, almost voluntary.
But why do that, especially given the history? Hasn't there been evidence before of UAE diverting weapons?
That's the crucial point. This isn't some new risk that just popped up. The UK knew back in 2016 that the UAE had sent Nimr APCs to armed groups in Libya and Somalia, violating UN arms embargoes.
And didn't some UK night vision gear end up with the Taliban too?
That's also been reported, yes. So there's a documented pattern of diversion risk. Issuing new open licenses in that context, well, it looks like willfully ignoring treaty obligations to prevent arms getting into the wrong hands. It creates an accountability vacuum.
That failure to monitor really highlights how governance structures can fall short. Let's look at a couple other places where political stability is pretty fragile right now. Brazil and Cameroon. Different situations, but maybe some parallels.
Definitely parallels in terms of challenges to the status quo. In Brazil, you've got former President Bolsonaro appealing a hefty 27-year prison sentence.
Right, that was for the coup attempt after he lost the election.
Exactly. And the details that came out were pretty shocking. Prosecutors laid out evidence of plans to actually assassinate President Lula, the vice president, even a Supreme Court judge.
Assassination plots.
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly serious. How did it even fail if it was that planned out?
Well, according to the reports, the plot itself was quite detailed, but it hinged entirely on getting critical sections of the military leadership on board.
And they refused.
They refused. So it wasn't a failure of planning necessarily, but a failure to secure that institutional backing. A high-stakes gamble that didn't pay off because key figures upheld the constitutional order.
Okay, so instability from an attempted power grab there. Now let's jump over to Cameroon. A very different kind of political tension.
Yeah, here you have Paul Biya, who is, get this, the world's oldest head of state at 92.
92. And he just claimed an 8th presidential term.
An 8th term, yes.
Yeah.
In an election that was widely disputed, with official results giving him about 53.7% of the vote.
An 8th term at 92. What's the average age in Cameroon? It must create a massive disconnect.
It's staggering. The median age in Cameroon is just 19. 19.
So most people there have literally never known another leader.
Pretty much. And if Biya serves out this full term, he'll be nearly 100 years old. It's almost unimaginable.
No wonder there were protests. The opposition claims they were actually winning based on independent counts, right?
That's right. The challenger, who's 79 himself, Issa Chiroma Bakary, contested the results strongly. It really lays bare this huge gap between an entrenched, aging leadership and a very, very young population demanding change.
Okay, from aging leaders and contested power. Let's shift gears to something a bit lighter, but still revealing about international relations. Automotive diplomacy, specifically between Japan and the U.S.
Ah, yes, the F-150 incident. This was quite a move. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, during a meeting with then-President Trump, tried to build some goodwill on trade issues.
How so?
She arranged for a huge American Ford F-150 pickup truck to be parked right there at the meeting location, a very visible symbol.
A gesture like, see, we like American things. And how did Trump react?
Predictably, perhaps, he apparently loved it, pointed at it, and said, "That's a hot truck."
Okay, a hot truck.
Yeah.
Implying Japan should buy more of them, I assume.
That was clearly the subtext. Trump often complained about trade imbalances and suggested Japan's standards were unfairly blocking U.S. cars.
But the reality on the ground in Japan is quite different, isn't it? Why don't huge American trucks sell well there?
It's mostly practical stuff, really. Less about standards and more about, well, size and infrastructure. Japan's smaller than California, remember?
Right, narrow roads, tiny parking spaces.
Exactly. Trying to maneuver an F-150 through Tokyo streets would be a nightmare. Compact cars just make way more sense.
And there's the steering wheel issue too, right?
Yeah, that's a big inconvenience. Japan drives on the left, so cars have the steering wheel on the right. Most big American models are left-hand drive. Imagine trying to pay tolls on an expressway or go through a drive-through.
Okay, so it's not necessarily protectionism, it's just physics and practicality.
Pretty much. Which is why, if you look at actual sales, the most popular American brand there, if you exclude Japanese cars made in the U.S., is Jeep. Smaller SUVs, much more manageable.
All right, let's bring things back down to the personal level for a moment. Something that affects all of us. Health and activity. We always hear, walk more, take more steps. But there's new research suggesting it's not quite that simple.
Right. This study adds a really important layer. It found that it's not just the total number of steps that counts for heart health, it's the pattern of your walking.
The pattern, meaning how you get those steps in.
Exactly. Longer, more continuous walks, think 10 to 15 minutes or more at a stretch, seem to be significantly better for your heart than, say, lots of very short bursts of walking spread throughout the day, like just walking to the photocopier and back multiple times.
Okay, so taking a dedicated 15-minute walk is better than just accumulating the same number of steps in 2-minute chunks here and there.
That's what the findings suggest, yeah. And this was especially true for people who were generally inactive otherwise. It implies getting your heart rate up and keeping it sustained for a bit is key.
So it underlines the advice like the NHS recommendation right now, aiming for that 150 minutes of moderate activity a week.
It does. It reinforces that, but adds this nuance about quality and consistency over just fragmented quantity. Making time for that slightly longer, purposeful stroll seems to make a real difference.
Okay, good tip. Now finally, let's look ahead to something that feels increasingly less like science fiction. Robots in care settings. Cleaning, helping the elderly exercise, assisting with mobility. There's a big debate brewing here.
There really is. You've got quite different perspectives emerging. On one side, you have optimists like Professor Ramchurn. He sees a potentially huge industry developing.
Why huge? Just because of the need.
Primarily, yes. We have massive shortages in the human caregiver workforce globally, coupled with rapidly aging populations in many countries. The demand is undeniable.
Makes sense.
But his main point, and this is crucial, is that we need to get ahead of the curve with regulations. Develop rules and ethical guidelines now before the big tech companies just roll out their systems like Tesla's Optimus robot without that input. We need to ensure these AI systems are safe, trustworthy, and actually benefit people.
That sounds like a lesson learned from other tech rollouts, maybe. Trying to regulate before it's already everywhere and potentially causing problems. Like we discussed with the arms exports, sort of the opposite approach.
Exactly. It's a call for proactive governance. But then you have the more pessimistic view, represented by someone like Dr. Wright.
And what's the concern there?
It's fundamentally economic. Dr. Wright argues that the only way these care robots become truly economically viable on a large scale might be by cutting costs elsewhere. Meaning potentially standardizing care homes to fit the robot's needs and, crucially, driving down wages for human carers.
Wait, so instead of robots freeing up humans for the important, compassionate parts of care?
The fear is that humans could end up being paid minimum wage, essentially, just to manage and maintain the robots.
Right.
Servicing the robots, as Dr. Wright put it.
So the efficiency gain might not translate into better quality care, but just cheaper, more standardized care, potentially losing the human touch.
That's the core tension, yes. Are we automating tasks to enhance human connection, or are we automating in a way that actually devalues that connection in the pursuit of economic efficiency? A really critical question as this tech develops. #TACTAD outro.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, from the stark reality of the 1.5°C climate target being missed and the trail of specific British engines in Sudan.
Yeah, all the way to political dramas in Brazil and Cameroon, that F-150 diplomacy.
And right down to how long you should walk and whether robots will truly help or hinder elderly care. It's quite a tapestry.
It really is, and if there's one thread pulling through all of this, it seems to be this constant friction, this tension between our existing political and institutional systems, which often seem slow or reactive or just failing.
Failing to monitor arms, failing to meet climate goals.
Right. Failing to keep pace with the threats or regulate new tech proactively. And on the other side, you have these individual actions, these grassroots movements, these technological shifts trying to force change from different directions.
We saw that contrast clearly, didn't we?
Oh,
You
yeah.
have aging leaders in places like Cameroon seemingly out of touch with young populations versus the UN Secretary General explicitly calling on civil society, on young people, on indigenous groups to lead on climate.
Which really brings us to a final thought, a question for you, our listener. When our traditional political system seems stuck or unresponsive, like we've seen in some of these examples, does real global change, the kind we need for challenges like climate or regulating future tech like AI and care, does that rely more now on these bottom-up movements, on radically different approaches, maybe like preemptive tech governance?
More than on the established institutions and traditional levers of power. It's a big question. What role can these newer, perhaps younger voices and different models play in actually breaking these cycles of failure we keep seeing?
Something to definitely think about.
Indeed. That's all we have time for on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.